Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out People of Reddit. Story 1. Walmart, the Summer of Cart Boy. Back in the summer of 2015 I was a poor college kid in need of cash, so I started working at the best retailer for employee treatment, /S, Walmart. When I was initially interviewing, they told me that I would be working as a cashier. However, once I got the job they decided to tell me what I would actually be doing, collecting and replenishing shopping carts. It was an incredibly hot summer, with most afternoons hitting 90+ degrees out and the asphalt scorching so badly that you could feel it almost burning through your shoes. Every day I would talk to other employees who had been there long-term and hearing how poorly they were treated. For instance, one of the late-night stalking guys was a Vietnam vet who had one arm, and Walmart kept him just below 40 hours per week so he couldn't receive health benefits. They also had an incentive program to prevent theft. Any stolen items from the store came directly out of the employees' Christmas bonus fund. Anyway, I did the job pretty well all summer, always had the carts restocked, helped customers with getting large items into their cars, etc. Well, as the summer was winding down I started to get incredibly irritated with this morbidly obese manager named Fran. Every single day she would waddle around and scream at one of us over the walkie-talkie. I hadn't been on the end of it yet until the last week of my job. It was about 4:45 p.m., right when super busy time hits and everyone is shopping for groceries. Carts were flying out of the place and the lot was full of them, but I had just received a call over the walkie-talkie from a cashier that an elderly woman needed help loading a ton of groceries into her car. Right as I start helping her load everything, Fran starts screaming over the radio, "Where the fuck is the cart boy?" The old woman looks at me sadly and says, "Do they really talk to you like that here?" As soon as I got her on her way, I walked into the store right past waddling Fran and into the back room. Clocked out, threw all of my stuff down, and drove home, with the store completely out of shopping carts. TLDR, morbidly obese cunt of a manager screamed at me in front of an elderly customer during one of my final shifts of the summer, so I left every cart in the parking lot and drove home. Story 2. I found something my ex-husband accused me of destroying and I returned it. My marriage, we were both in our 30s, this is important, had problems right away. One of the manifestations was him berating me for not going to an elite university. I went to a very good undergrad and an even better grad school, had not finished at that point, but he went to one of the best schools in the country, known for graduates with a chip on their shoulder. That was really all he had on me, and I would just laugh. Even his parents told him he was being a jerk and sounded like an idiot because I had an impressive education. Something I had never felt the need to discuss before. So anyway, he became really competitive about his college and especially his friends from college, very few he was still in touch with. This was before Facebook, and he had this photo box full of memorabilia. Cardboard, no lock or anything. I had a dozen or so myself. A normal thing would be to go through his, and mine, together and share memories and stories and bond. I didn't really care about what was in the box, and college stories are boring when you weren't there, but I would have listened. But the box became a symbol of everything wrong, with him constantly saying I'm not good enough for his college friends. At some point he forbid me to look in the box. Of course I didn't take this well. Telling me I wasn't good enough to see what's in the box was like kerosene. It got brought up in every fight. Like a death spiral of "you're jealous of my friends" / "your friends suck and I wouldn't like them anyway." I didn't say I was the hero in this story. Fast forward through years of abuse. We moved on to more spectacular fights and the box fell pretty far down the list. Then for some reason one day he went up to the attic and couldn't find his box. He said I threw it away because I was jealous and petty. I didn't. But after a few years of this he managed to convince me maybe I did. That's how abuse works. And you threw away my box went back into heavy rotation. I begged his forgiveness. And fell into deeper into depression over the depths to which my life had sunk. Finally got a divorce. Cops, Rose, the whole nine. I healed, moved on. Years later I sold my house, it was mine before, and when I was packing up I found the damn box. I had such an emotional reaction my legs buckled. I sat on the floor and wept. My boyfriend was really sweet about it. He didn't know about the box. It's so ridiculous and I was so ashamed, but mostly I had put it all behind me by then. Until it all came rushing back. I called a mutual friend and asked him to come get the box so they could get it to him. People suggested I should throw it away out of spite, but I had something to prove. Before I turned it over, I put copies of 2 unpublished essays I wrote about what he did to me, along with a handwritten note, "I knew you didn't have the balls to kill me. And I sold your D&D books." Who's he going to tell? I mean, he probably will. But then he has to admit what's in the essays, and he's the 52-year-old man bitching 10 years post-divorce that his ex-wife sold his D&D books. Story 3. Christmas pettiness that kept on giving. This is a story about my mom, and the absolute depths of pettiness she could sink to. Growing up, we could never put lights on our Christmas tree. My parents would always say it was a fire hazard, and would recount a story about one of their first Christmases together when their tree caught fire. Apparently, my dad had fallen asleep on the couch and was woken up to the kitchen and living room filled with smoke. He woke up my mom and got her and the dog out of the house, then ran back inside to check things out. He came out a few minutes later with the tree wrapped in a blanket and threw it into a snowbank, saying it had caught fire. Ever since, they had a no lights on the tree rule to prevent a repeat occurrence. So my whole life, we never put lights on the tree, despite nearly everyone else we knew, including both sets of grandparents, putting lights on their trees. I'd occasionally question my parents about it, and would always get the same fire hazard story. My mom did go to some lengths to make up for it though, with a lot of colorful glass balls that would catch the light, as well as other reflective ornaments. Anyway, years pass and I'm now an adult. One year I'm talking to my mom and the tree fire story comes up. She chuckles and asks if I'd like to hear the real story. Turns out, that night many years ago, the tree did not catch fire. What actually happened was my dad decided to fix himself something on the stove late at night. He fell asleep on the couch with the pan still on the hot burner and it eventually began to smoke, waking him up. After he got my mom out of the house and realized what caused the smoke, rather than take the tongue lashing about the ruined pan and irresponsible stove use, he decided to pin the blame on the tree. A few theatrics later and he thinks he's gotten away with it. He even brought the burnt tree back inside the next day saying it must not have burnt much because it still looked all right. He might have pulled it off too, had he done more than just thrown the ruined pan into the kitchen trash can. My mom found it in the trash the very next day and put 2 and 2 together pretty quickly. She could have nailed him to the wall right then and there, but she decided to play the long game and didn't say a word. See, it turns out she never cared that much about lights on the tree. It was my dad that really liked them. So next year, and every year thereafter, when they were decorating the tree and he'd go to put lights on it, she'd remind him that they couldn't put lights on the tree because of that time it caught fire. I don't think she ever intended for this to be a long-running thing, but my dad was stubborn to a fault and never admitted it was really the pan. So every year she kept his lie going, knowing he was the one paying for it. She did eventually tell him that she knew the truth, some 30 years later. He had developed cancer and it was his last Christmas, so she decided to come clean. He just laughed and laughed about it. She gave him the option to do lights on the tree that year, but by then he'd had more years without a lit tree than with, and had grown to prefer the tree the way we always decorated it. Story 4. Dad's last-second change of mind becomes vengeance upon a deadbeat mother. I'm new to Reddit, in general, and petty revenge, in particular, so I'll just have to hope this story fits. I won't bore you with all the sordid details of my past relationship with my now 30-year-old son's female birth parent. I call her the egg donor IRL because she's never been his mother. That honor belongs to my wife, whom I met when my son was 8. The short version is, like many young people often do, thought having a child would help our failing relationship. I was 23 when my namesake was born, she was 26. As is the norm, it didn't work. For reasons that belong in a different story, we split up when my son was 8 months old. Walking out of the apartment we shared without taking my son with me was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced in my life up to that point and will likely remain so until the day my mother draws her last breath. I was devastated. After my own less than ideal childhood, all I'd ever wanted was my own family, but I had to walk away, for my own mental health, if nothing else, physical health, too, but also a different story. It turned out that that period didn't last that long, because 2 days after my son's first birthday, she called me to ask if I wanted my son. I literally jumped at the chance. I picked him up less than an hour later and he lived with me from that day until his junior year of high school. We were moving and he didn't want to, so he stayed with his friend's family until he graduated. Egg donor, however, promptly disappeared for about 1.5 years, no address, no phone number, no way to contact her whatsoever. To simplify the rest of the story, she came back from wherever she'd wandered off to and we settled into an uneasy agreement for visitation for the next couple of years, although there was the time she didn't show up when we went to court for official custody, which I needed to enroll him in school, despite living within walking distance of the courthouse, less than a mile. Until one day, out of the complete blue, she decided to take me to court for official, court-ordered visitation, with all that entailed. At first, I intended to fight her tooth and nail. If you knew the entire story, you'd understand why, but again, this isn't that story, even up to and including the day of court. I was thinking about the myriad reasons why I believed she shouldn't have official visitation rights as she was telling the judge why she should. It's important for me to note that I would never have kept my son from her, and never did, despite many reasons to do so. I also tried my best never to speak ill of her in his presence. I failed in that, although it was rare, even though I knew she wasn't going to do the same. I wanted him to reach his own conclusions about her and didn't want to color his perception of her with my own. They have very, very minimal contact now, if any, to the point that she wasn't invited to his wedding or the birth of his son, while my wife and I were, although she could attend neither. It's also important to note that, although I had physical custody of my son, she had not paid me a single red cent for anything I needed to care for him: clothing, food, diapers, medicines, nothing. Cue the petty revenge part of this story. As the judge asked me if I had a problem with an official visitation arrangement, I changed my mind, simply stating, no, I don't have a problem with it, as long as I get child support and half of my babysitting bill paid, surprising egg donor, who had anticipated a fight. Truth be told, even though I spoke the words, they surprised even me. The judge banged her gavel, saying, done. Before egg donor could even think of protesting. If looks could kill, I'd have died in blazing hellfire on that very spot that day, and I am not joking. There was pure, unadulterated murderous intent behind those eyes. It took a really long time for DYFS to enforce the order, due to egg donor getting SSDI, which, at the time, couldn't be automatically attached, and she actually wound up in jail for non-payment, $5,000 in arrears, IIRC, which is also a different story, but in the end, she wound up paying. Eventually. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.